Hello everybody, in this video we're going to start explore the exchange rate in the long run. So in the previous video we look at what is exchange rate and what is appreciation and depreciation and how will that affect the domestic and international market. So here we look at the long run, so especially what are the main trend if we look at the exchange rate in the long run. So to understand the long run performance of the exchange rate, and we have to talk about a very famous economic theory, so that is called the law of the one price. So on your textbook, it's called the theory of the purchasing power parity. So what does that mean? So if we consider exchange rate, so the exchange rate should play a role so that it can balance the price of the U.S. product and the product in another country. So let's see. The price in the one egg in United States is $1, and so if the price in China of the one egg is 7 yuan, so the exchange rate should be equal to 7. So the exchange rate should equal to 7. $1 should equal to 7 yuan. So why is that? And so that means if the U.S. dollar, if the egg is $1 in the United States, if the Chinese is exchange rate causing the egg in China is cheaper than the egg in the U.S. So let's see, the egg in China is only 6 yuan, but exchange rate is $1 equal to 7 yuan. So what happened is the egg in China will be relatively cheaper than the U.S. So let's assume there is no shipping cost, there is no impatience of the consumers. So what happened is business can just directly purchasing the egg in China and then mail to US and try to make profit by doing that. So then there will exist in arbitrary. So the existing of the arbitrary eventually are going to balance out. So eventually you will see that the equilibrium, that is the egg in US, and after you convert it using exchange rate, should equal to the price in the in China. So that is underlying. This is the explanation of the law of the one price. So when we look at the law of the one price, or the theory of the purchasing power parity, you have to pay attention on the following assumptions. So in this theory, we assume all goods are identical in both countries. So which means the egg in China will be totally exactly the same the egg in US. So the consumer buying the egg from China, buying from the US, are the same because they don't feel the quality difference of the eggs. So that's the first assumption. And the second assumption is very important. Obviously, you will think it's very unrealistic. So that is called the trade barrier and the transaction are low. So just like I talk about when we look at eggs, if you look at the real world, you can see that if you're shipping the egg from China to US, there are a lot of costs involved. So the shipping cost, labor cost, and also the inspection cost. But in this theory, we're actually assuming all of those are not exist. So the goods can freely transfer across the boundary. So those are the important assumptions. The third assumption is the goods and services are not traded across borders. The goods and services are not traded across borders. And so that is the underlying assumption for the theory. And so we are using the theory to guiding the long-term movement of exchange rate. So if that's the case, how the exchange rate should look like in the long run. So actually, when we look at long run exchange rate, we have to discuss another perspective of the theory of the purchasing power parity that is called the real exchange rate. So the real exchange rate is the rate at which domestic goods can be exchanged for foreign goods. So that's the definition for the real exchange rate. So in order to calculate this real exchange rate, we have to use the second definition. So that is the price of domestic goods relative to the price of the foreign goods denominated in the domestic currency. So which means, first of all, you get the price of the one egg in the United States. And then you look at the price in China, and then using the exchange rate, you see the exchange rate reported on the newspaper and convert it back to the US dollar, and the price ratio between the domestic goods and these foreign goods denominated in US dollars. So that ratio is considered as the real exchange rate. So to help you to understand this definition, and we're going to look at this example together. So let's see, a bucket of the KFC chicken in China costs 100 yuan. The exchange rate is $1 equal to 6.7 yuan, and the bucket of the KFC chicken is in the US dollar. It costs 20 $20.49. So what is the real exchange rate? So to calculate the real exchange rate, we have to use the second line of the definition. So the price of domestic goods, which is $20.49, and relative to the price of the foreign goods, it's 100 yuan, but you need to convert it back to the US dollar. So that's why in order to get this real exchange rate, first of all, we have to convert this 100 yuan back to the US dollar, given the exchange rate is 6.9, 6.7, 6.7. So let's do the calculation together. So we actually see this formula before. And so the price in the US dollar, if you want to convert any foreign goods back to the US dollar, what you need to do is using the price in foreign currency and then divide by the exchange rate. So in this case, we know a bucket of the KFC chicken is 100 yuan, and then divide by the exchange rate, 6.7. So then we convert 100 yuans, the bucket of the KFC chicken in China, to the US dollar. So that's equal to $14.9254. So now we can start to calculate the real exchange rate. So we're using the domestic good, the goods in the domestic market. So that is $20.49. So $20.49. $20.49 divided by $14.93. So I round the number to 2 decimal places, so 93 cents. So you push, oh sorry, and so what you will get is equal to 1.37. So the real exchange rate is 1.37. So this is how we calculate the real exchange rate. And so one thing I want to emphasize is, so when you go to the bank to convert your US dollar to any other foreign currencies, that exchange rate is not real exchange rate. So that's just the exchange rate. So in order to get the real exchange rate, that is the method we should use to calculate it. So usually the bank won't show you the real exchange rate because it depends on the items. It depends on items. And so why we need to learn the real exchange rate? Because we're actually going to use this real exchange rate to reinterpret the purchasing power parity. So think about if the purchasing power parity, so PPP, purchasing power parity theory holds. So what does that mean? So that means the real exchange rate should equal to 0. Because if you think about the PPP, it talk about the goods in the United States should equal to the price of the foreign goods, same goods, and convert it back to the US dollars. So then basically, after you convert these goods sold in these foreign goods back to the domestic currency, so this ratio should equal to 1. So that's what we want to talk about, is based on the PPP, purchasing power parity. So in the long run, you will see is the real exchange rate should equal to 1. So the real exchange rate equal to 1. And so then some students might ask, so how about sometimes the government want to stimulate the economy and they raise the price level, so which means they might issue more currencies causing the inflation. So how will that actually affect the exchange rate? So actually what we notice that when the one country's price level goes up, so one country's price level rise relative to another country, so the other country's currency will be appreciated. So the other country's currency will be appreciated, try to counteracting what we've seen on the price level changes. So to help you to prove this movement, this relationship, I want to show you this diagram. So on this diagram, it's looking at between 1973 to 2013, how the relative price level changes between UK and US, and also how that affecting the exchange rate. So the exchange rate we are seeing here is not real exchange rate. The exchange rate we see here is just the exchange rate you see on the newspaper. And so if you look at the changes, you can see that the red line, it is a relative price level. So for this past like 40 years, so the past 40 years, you will notice that the relative price level between UK and US actually goes up. So which means the UK have relatively higher inflation than the United States. And look at the exchange rate. So the exchange rate is per dollar how many pounds they can get. You can see this green line in general trend is goes up because it's starting from about 100. So at the end of like the middle of 2013, so the price level, the value here is much higher than the 100 starting point 100. So which means $1 can get more pound. So that means US dollar appreciated. So if you go back to look at the conclusion we got, so one country's price level rises. So you can see the UK's price level rise higher, faster than the US, United States. So what we see is United States currency appreciated. So that's why the other countries' currency appreciated. But also some students, if you look at this diagram, you notice that these two lines is not perfectly parallel to each other. So which means they are not perfectly tracking on each other. And also if you look at the percentage wise, so the price level increased by 63%, and actually the US dollar appreciated by 90%. So they are not perfectly like what we've seen here is they will increase the same percentage. Actually, in this situation, the currency is appreciating higher percentage and the price level rise. So which means the theory is not perfect. So that's why we're going to look at for PPP, what are the problems? So the first, this theory didn't consider the non-tradable goods. So the non-tradable goods, such as the volunteer works. So the service goods is considered as goods. So the volunteer work never can be never can trade. Can involve in international trade, and also second is they're assuming the goods are not identical. They are assuming the goods are identical, but actually the goods are not identical. In the first slide, when I'm showing you the picture, the cheese in the KFC, so they're using a deep fried chicken as a crust of the pizza instead of using the bread. So those kind of products you actually cannot find in the United States. Of the same situation, you can see a lot of the Chinese US goods you won't be able to find in another country as well. So this theory didn't consider the situation that the goods actually are not identical in the real world. And the third problem of this theory is that they consider the barrier are very low. But in reality is, as I mentioned, the tariff always exists, and also there is a lot, besides the tariff and the protection of the technology don't allow certain goods to sold in other countries. So there are a lot of barriers exist when we look at international trade. However, for this theory, PPP, purchasing power parity, it doesn't consider these three important facts we see in the real world. That's why when we look at a long-term exchange rate, ideally we see is that the real exchange rate should close to 1, but it won't exactly equal to 1. So now we're going to look at application what we just seen. So obviously we saw the flaw of the PPP. So that's why the economists actually came out with another idea to measuring the purchasing power parity. So they are using the Big Mac index. So Big Mac index. So it created in 1986. Since then, the people keep updating this index. So instead of using the exchange rate, real exchange rate to measure the changes and the relationship between the price level and exchange rate, and we're actually using the Big Mac index. So I'll show you the Big Mac index in the next slide here. So you can see the first column is the price of the Big Mac in domestic currencies, and then we convert to the US dollars. You can see this is the 2014, I believe I used the 2014 one. So you can look at the Big Mac in different countries. So in the United States, it's 3.57. If the PPP holds, all the number should be the $3.57. Obviously, you can see it's not the case. It's not the case. So look at the third column. So the third column is implied a PPP of the dollar, and the fifth column is actual exchange rate. So you can see if we're using the PPP to forecasting the actual exchange rate, you will see it will not be accurate. So look at Argentina. If you're using PPP to predict a long-term exchange rate, that would be 3.08, but reality is 3.02. So there is the big difference between this prediction. However, the PPP can predict the general trend of the exchange rate, but it won't be accurately predicted. It won't be able to accurately predict it. So this is a very important theory to guide us to understand the movement of the long-term exchange rate. So next we're going to look at is what are the factors actually going to shift our long-term exchange rate. So that is the factor we're going to discuss. So first, the factor going to affect the long-term exchange rate involving the relative price level we just discussed. And so the UK and the UK relative price level between UK and US is a good example. So when the price level goes up, so your domestic currency will depreciate it, but foreign currency will be appreciated. How about the trade barriers? So think about when trade barrier goes up. So just like the President Trump increasing the trade barrier, increasing the tariff, so it causing the domestic consumers more likely to purchasing the domestic goods. So the needs for the domestic currency goes up, that appreciating the value of the domestic currency. So that's why when trade barrier go up, the domestic currency actually becomes stronger. So if you don't believe me, and you can look at the exchange rate of the Chinese currency when the Trump imposed the trade barrier, increasing the tariff, trade war. So you can see the Chinese currency actually start to strongly depreciating. I remember it was like 6.5 2 years ago. Now it's a $1 equal to 7.1. So 2020 now is $1 equal to 7 yuan. So which is a great depreciation for US Chinese dollar, Chinese yuan, but a great appreciation for the US dollar. So when the trade barrier goes up, the domestic currency will appreciate it. How about the preference for the domestic versus the foreign goods? So let's see, the U.S. consumer become very in love to the Chinese goods. So which means that the import from China will goes up. So people will need more Chinese currencies because they need to purchase the Chinese goods. So when the import goods goes up, so the domestic currency will depreciate it because people no longer need more US dollar because they need more foreign dollar to buy the Chinese goods. That need more Chinese yuan to buy Chinese goods. So that's why when the import goes up, the domestic currency actually will depreciate it, will start to depreciate it. And so opposite situation, when the domestic good become very popular, which means your export goes up. So export goes up, so your foreign consumer need more your domestic goods, so they need to convert more currency to your domestic currencies. So then the domestic currency will be appreciated. So when export increase, so the domestic currency will be appreciated. So the last one, the productivity. So when the productivity goes up, so more goods made in the domestic market and more likely to export to other countries. And so that also means the domestic goods will be needed and the domestic currency will be needed by the domestic goods. So that's why the domestic currency will be appreciated. So when the productivity goes up, and then the domestic currency will be up. And so domestic price level goes up, domestic currency actually depreciated. Trade barriers goes up, and domestic currency will be appreciated. And the import demand goes up, and the domestic currency depreciated. Export goes up, and the domestic currency will be appreciated. And productivity goes up, and the domestic currency also will be appreciated. And so in next video, we're going to look at how the exchange rate will perform in the short run.